We have a terrific discussion lined up about empowering women and girls, and often the subject comes up in terms of inequities and unfairness. And today we're really going to focus on the other side of the question, the gains, the notion that one can't modernize a country, one can't build a modern civil society if one doesn't take advantage of half the country's population. This is actually an area where there has been real success. 500 million women have moved into the labor market over the last 30 years. The economists who've crunched the numbers say that women joining the economy have added more to economic output than the rise of China or than technological advancement. And we have a couple of terrific panelists who I'd like to welcome to the stage. Cherie Blair is founder of the Cherie Blair Foundation for Women. And Bineta Diop founded a NGO to advance women in Senegal and is now a special envoy of the African Union based in Addis. So let me raise the question of what the private sector can do to harness and empower the female half of the population. Let me frame it with a story. When I was based in China in the late 80s, early 90s, my wife and I were writing about how girls weren't able to go to school, parents didn't want to educate a daughter. And we chose as the poster child for this phenomenon a girl, a 6th grade girl named Daimanju, for whom the school fees were $13. Brightest kid in the school, had to drop out. We wrote about her, put her picture across 3 columns on the front page of the New York Times. Readers responded with an overwhelming shower of $13 checks to send her to school. New York Times readers are incredibly generous in $13 increments. And but we also got a wire transfer for $10,000 to send these kids to school. So we took this money, worked out a deal with the principal whereby these girls in this village would be able to stay in school as long as they could make the grade. We actually called up the donor to thank him for this $10,000, and he said, $10,000? I only sent $100. And it turned out the bank had a little problem with the decimal point. So we were nervous at the end of the quarter, end of the month, that the bank would find the error, would want to try to claw back the money. I'm a little embarrassed about what happened next. I called up the chief spokesman for the bank. I explained the error, and I said, now, I sort of let slip the follow-up article I was working on. It worked. And I said, on the record, are you going to try to... I said, on the record, are you going to try to get that $9,900 back and force all these girls to drop out of school? And he said, on the record, we're delighted to make a donation of the difference. And so that was 1990, and we've been back to this village repeatedly since. And obviously all of China has modernized since then, has become much better educated. But you go to this village, and it is far and away better off than all of the little villages all around it, because for a generation now, you've had girls in that village who've been able to go to school, join the economy in ways that haven't just benefited them, but have benefited the entire community. And that was the case of the private sector hugely transforming one village because of a banking error. How do we harness the private sector to make a broader difference? And Cherie, let me start with you. This is something you've worked on a great deal.
Sure. Well, let me say, first of all, no one expects the private sector to solve all the problems of the world on its own. But it is absolutely part of the solution. So my first answer to that is partnerships. Because the private sector has skills which can be harnessed to make a difference. But they need partnership with NGOs, particularly local NGOs, with who the people trust and who know what's actually wanted, so you need to have partnership with that. And at the end of the day, you also have to have an input from government. Because I think in some parts of the world now, it's almost as though the private sector is expected to do the job that government is supposed to do. So that there has to be a tripartite partnership with the civil society, the private sector, and indeed the public sector. But for too long, we've neglected the role of the private sector in that, and that's why it's great to see more and more examples of businesses getting engaged with their community and getting engaged in a way that harnesses the skills, the particular skills that business have. Because as somebody said this morning, it's not just enough, it's very nice, we always need money, but to give something just because you feel a little bad is one thing, but to actually make this part of your business and understand the business case for why you are doing this is much more sustainable.
What does that mean in a practical sense? So if there's a CEO here, then what, do they tell their Jakarta, their Indonesia country director, okay, do we have opportunities to work with the NGO in Indonesia on hiring more women, on educating more women? What do you specifically counsel somebody to do?
I think you need to look at your particular skills. In some, you were talking about your particular skill and how that worked. In the extractives industry, then you may have a different sort of skill set. So, for example, businesses in the extractive industry are much more aware now about the impact they're making on the local community. And talk about a clinic for the workers in the mine. Now that's a good thing, and that business imperative to make that clinic work so that their workers are healthy. But actually, if you also share those facilities with the local neighborhood, then you're going to get a much better relationship with the local community and a buy-in from the community. I'd say that isn't just doing something with your heart, it's doing something with your head, because it's emphasizing the business case of your core business, which is getting the coal out of the ground, but making sure you protect that by engaging with the local community. So that example.
Yeah. Thank you. While you were talking, I was thinking of my last week trip to Bunia, Beni, and Wicha. This is the triangle of death for women. Bunia, Beni, Wicha. It's in DRC. I was there last week, the whole of last week, to see young boys and girls that have been violated. Some of them, the parents have been slaughtered. You have seen it in the media, and the boys and the girls are there suffering. But we see that some countries, that DRC, they still have 5% of economic growth, right? So investment, either it is in infrastructure, mining, whatever, is there. The growth is there, but the social growth for the people, where is it? Social inclusion, education. I gave my NGOs and the local NGOs that week 51 scholarship for young girls and boys to go back to school. Just $100 for 1 year, not paid. The women themselves in hospital, when you give birth, what do you expect? It's a joy for the family. But you don't pay the maternity, the clinics, or the hospital for $120, and you are kept in custody in that hospital. That's the reality that we face there. We had to pay in the hospital while I was visiting to say pay for this 3 months, a baby of 3 months in that hospital with the parents because they don't have $100 to pay. That's the reality on the ground. What private sector could do? Of course, private sector investing in those areas. Extractive industry, you name them. And the women were telling me, we need to restore our dignity. We are not begging. What we want is to go back to our land. Yes, provide them the land. The government, public, private, but give them mechanization, provide them with support. The resilient women that wanted to do farming with the Mo Ibrahim, we have been working on the project, which is IWA, Empower Women in Agriculture, with Ellen Johnson Sirleaf and others, with Rwanda and other places, where we say women have to go back to land. And I think this is some kind of support we can give to women to restore their dignity. Private sector have a big role to play. Government have the big role to play, but also civil society. Because the women's farmers are the ones that are there. Why don't we put them in cooperatives? And access to finance, access to. That's what the women are asking. Restoring their dignity by giving them those access.
Bineta, you've worked a great deal in some of these conflict areas. As you say, you're just back from Congo. You're, I think, about to go to South Sudan. You've been in Central African Republic. And while there has been so much progress, both on behalf of women and against poverty globally, the real exceptions are those conflict areas. And we tend to think of that as the role of the United Nations or perhaps of governments. But is there a role for business in trying to keep South Sudan, for example, from going over the precipice? And doesn't that create problems for, I mean, businesses are often reluctant to talk truth to power, especially if it's an autocratic leader who doesn't want to hear it.
Yeah, I think this morning I hear about the issues of corruption that Mo have put on the table, the issues of governance and so on. But in the meantime, there are private sector that talk to governance. They're making business on that. And we know that the private sector can play a key role on putting also pressure by making sure that the contract that they're signing are public contract, because even the people in the ground, the women themselves, they are not aware on what is going on. But by making it public and making sure that, for example, a percentage of those contracts go to the women, why not? Because they are the one in the community. They are the one that tomorrow will be protecting even your business. And if you want to employ them, because we realize that right now 70%, around 70% on workers, for example, in agriculture sector, are women or women and the young people. So why do we make sure that, when we are doing agriculture in a country, XYZ in Africa, not just the one on Sudan and others, but for example, my country, Senegal, we know that there are opportunities for agriculture sector. So why don't we make sure that the people, the women that wanted to cultivate rice are part and leaders and champion, but not just the workers, but you help them to do the cooperative themselves with the young people, create a job, but also build their skills. Because now we are talking about the fourth, the revolution, technology. Why not give them the opportunity to be part of that process? Not just being the workers, but give them a leading role in those kind of innovative projects. We need to think out of the box how we can do it in a different way if we really do wanted to have an inclusive society rather than divisive. Because at the end of the day, we see growing industries while the people are sitting there and doing nothing and seeing large amount and resources going out and the population being left out.
Let me just go back to basics here. Why does it make sense to invest in women and girls? Exactly. Firstly, it's because of the generational effect, because all the research shows that if you invest in a woman, if you educate in a woman, if you enable her to have a violent-free, healthy life, that will have a huge impact, not just on herself, but on her children and on the wider community. Research after research shows you give a development dollar to a woman, 90 cents of that will be spent on everyone else. You give that same development dollar to a man and it's 30 to 40%. Now, we're all supposed to be business people here. Now, if that's the effect, you get double your money for giving that dollar to the woman. Yeah. Why is it that most of the development programs today give to men? Well, what's the answer to that? Because of assumptions that people still make about what's the role of woman and what's the role of men. If you look at access to the internet, everybody knows that today, the Pope has said in the past that there's almost a human right to be able to access the information that is there on the internet. If you look at who's getting access to the internet, there's a gender disparity between women and men. Even with the mobile phone, and yes, across the world, women have access to the mobile phone, but my foundation did research to show that actually women were getting less access than men. And as a result of that, the mobile phone industry responded with a program to try and reach what was a $13 billion opportunity for them to do business with women on the mobile phone. But it's not enough to give a woman a mobile phone. She also needs to know how to use it. And so you need to have training, you need to have support, and you need to have the incentive that is, as you say, the dignity that comes from job creation, because a mobile phone can do all those things for you.
Let me ask about backlashes. I mean, the places where many of these gender gaps are greatest issue are those where culture or faith are different, where Western business is regarded with tremendous suspicion. And what is the role of business there? And in Pakistan, I think there are few organizations that have empowered women more than McDonald's, because it hires young women. This is regarded as subversive by many Pakistanis. It gives young women an extra uniform so that if the brother finds one, he can throw one out and the woman can still work. But some companies likewise, because of the point you made that women spend money in ways that are more likely to help their kids, some companies pay even their male workers in accounts that are controlled by the wife, on the theory that's going to help the kids more. Is this is kind of social engineering? Is it social engineering that companies should engage in? Is there a risk that they're going to get into trouble locally if they are perceived as clashing with local traditions and values?
Well, obviously you've got to be culturally sensitive, and there are ways and means of doing these things which goes with the flow of the community. Now, we work with women's economic empowerment, so we're helping small and growing businesses expand. And lots of people say to me, but surely when you're working in the Middle East or in Pakistan, their husbands object. But most men are pragmatists, and if they see that it's actually going to benefit their life, you would be surprised at how many of them actually are perfectly happy to take the money. And don't discard the fact that there are plenty of fathers and husbands who actually want to see their women flourish. And yes, there are those men who want to keep women down. And for that, there are various techniques. Some of the women we work with, I remember I was in Israel where we were working within the Arab community, and there was a woman there who was running a little guest house, lodging house. And I asked her, she was supporting her family, and asked her what had happened to her husband. And she said, well, he didn't agree with me working. So I said, well, what happened? She said, well, I lost the husband, she got rid of him. So, don't imagine that women don't also have choices to make as well. But the vast majority of people, if it makes their life better, why wouldn't they want to support that?
The battle of women's empowerment, which we say this gender revolution, it's a revolution that has to be led by men. Because we know that if the men get engaged in this revolution, we will succeed. And I think that is why in this room, which is a majority of men, but majority of leaders, they should be championing this cause. Because it's not just about, doing good. Yes, it is about, but it's also doing the smart things, because women have the capacity and the knowledge and the competence. We bring another dimension into the workplace or whatever. So when it comes to the cultural issue, in Africa, women transform. They are the ones that are in the market. They are the ones that are in the, the informal trade. You take them from Benin, from where, while the men are sitting, drinking their tea or whatever, and the women are the ones that are making without the women, I don't think that the economy in North Africa will be where it is now. So we need to count on those resources, and they are going to be to make the transformative way that the Pope Francis is asking for. And I think we need to invest on those, it's the youth, and it's on the women. And it should be our own cause. It should not be her and mine, but also your cause, and be embedded in your strategy and in your solution. It should not be something that you just add. You have to just think, how do we make it in the business model that you are putting in place in some countries like our own countries. I wanted to add something on education, because I think that with this innovation, online courses going on all over. I spent some in my own NGOs doing a master program for young men and women on these gender issues in the University of Senegal, trying to put bricks by bricks to make sure that we get something. It's difficult as an NGO, but we are getting there, because we think that education is the key at the end of the day. And putting our girls and our boys, not just the girls, but also the young boys, maintaining them at school is the smart thing to do, and we need to invest on that. But most of the time, people will tell you, no, I think it is the government only. Okay, government can do, but private sector also can own those centers of excellence, those universities, those schools that can, and even in your industry, create the small schools for the women that you are employing. And I think that is where we need to invest. Education, employment of the young and of the women. That's for Africa, my continent. That will bring the transformation that we want.
Can I just say one thing? Because I don't think this backlash is just about the developing world, by the way. I think that we can see this backlash actually across the developed world as well. And one could say that some of the things that were said in the American election and which apparently were accepted as acceptable to say, reflects a backlash that some people who felt that they've been missed out and they find an easy target to blame. It's because women are the ones who are emasculating men. So this is a big issue, and it's about ensuring that people understand that nobody is entitled to a job. Everybody has the chance to get a job, but it's about the skills, it's about your talents, and there shouldn't be any such thing as this is a job only for men and therefore women are taking our jobs. It's about who has the talents and skills to do the best job, whether that's at the CEO level, in the boardroom, or right down to whichever level you want to go.
I'm afraid we're out of time, but we do hope that this issue is going to be incorporated into the sessions this afternoon and elsewhere. And I also just wanted to underscore something that Bineta said, that for companies, this issue is not effectively addressed if it's an issue of corporate social responsibility on the side, on the fringe somewhere. That where this tends to have effect is if it's brought into the core in sourcing and employment and so on. And with that, please join me in thanking our terrific guests.